A Roman seasoning, worth its weight in gold, simply vanished from the earth. Priests in ancient India and Persia drank a sacred brew for visions. But today, no one knows what plant it came from. Imagine a flock of birds so huge it darkened the sky for days. Their taste is now just a memory. Workers who built the pyramids drank a special kind of beer, made with bread and wild desert yeasts we can no longer perfectly recreate. Number 11. The Great Auk egg omelette you'll never devour. Imagine a bird that looked a bit like a penguin, but lived in the chilly North Atlantic Ocean. This was the Great Auk. It was a fairly large bird, standing about 75 to 85 centimeters tall, which is around 2.5 to nearly 3 feet. It couldn't fly, not even a little bit. Its wings were tiny, more like flippers, which made it an amazing swimmer and diver, super speedy underwater hunting for fish. On land, though it was a bit clumsy and slow, for thousands of years, these birds lived on rocky islands and coasts, from Canada and Greenland across to Iceland, Scandinavia, and the British Isles. Now, think about their eggs. Each breeding pair of Great Auks laid just 1 egg per year, but it was a big one. The eggs were about 13 centimeters long. That's over 5 inches. They were usually whitish or yellowish, with very interesting patterns of black and brown streaks and spots, unique to each egg like a fingerprint. For people living near the coasts and for sailors on long voyages, these eggs were a real find. They were a good source of food, packed with nutrients. You could cook them just like chicken eggs, boil them, fry them, or whip them up into a massive omelette. Given the size, 1 Great Auk egg omelette would have been a very substantial meal for a hungry person. Indigenous peoples of North America valued them, and later, European fishermen and explorers did too. The birds themselves were also hunted for their meat, feathers, and oil. So why can't you stroll down to a specialty store and pick up a Great Auk egg today? Well, it's a sad story. Because they couldn't fly and nested in large, dense colonies in very specific accessible locations, they were incredibly easy prey for humans. Sailors would land on their breeding islands and collect eggs by the barrelful. They also killed the adult birds in huge numbers. This went by the early 1800s. They were becoming rare. People started to realize they might disappear, but the hunting continued. The last known pair of Great Auks was killed on Eldey Island off the coast of Iceland on June 3, 1844. Their very last egg was also collected, though it was reportedly smashed in the process. And just like that, the Great Auk was gone from the world extinct. So that giant, nutritious omelette, a taste known for thousands of years, can now only be imagined. No chef, no matter how skilled, can ever recreate it. Number 10. The woolly mammoth steak that's lost to the Ice Age. Picture the world thousands of years ago, during the last Ice Age. It was a cold place, with vast grasslands stretching across continents. Roaming these lands were giant, shaggy creatures with long, curved tusks. These were the woolly mammoths. They were huge, about the size of modern African elephants, but covered in thick fur to keep them warm. Early humans lived alongside these magnificent beasts, and for them, a mammoth was a major source of food, clothing, and even shelter, using their bones and tusks to build huts. Hunting a woolly mammoth would have been a dangerous and difficult task, requiring teamwork, bravery, and clever strategies. Imagine the feast. After a successful mammoth hunt, there would have been a lot of meat, enough to feed a whole group of people for a long time. What would a woolly mammoth steak have tasted like? It's hard to say for sure. Scientists think their meat might have been similar to elephant meat, perhaps a bit tougher or gamier than the beef we eat today. It would have been red meat, rich in protein. How our ancestors cooked it is also a bit of a mystery. They probably roasted large chunks over open fires. Maybe they stewed tougher bits in pits with hot stones. The marrow from the massive bones would have been a prized fatty treat, full of calories which were vital in the cold Ice Age environment. So why can't we order a mammoth steak at a fancy restaurant, or even try to cook one up ourselves, if we were really adventurous? The answer is simple. Woolly mammoths are extinct. They disappeared around 10,000 years ago from most of their range. Though a few small, isolated populations survived on islands like Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean, until about 4,000 years ago. The reasons for their extinction are thought to be a combination of climate change, as the world warmed up after the Ice Age and their grassland habitat changed, and hunting by humans. Now you might have heard stories about scientists finding frozen mammoth carcasses in Siberia. Some so well preserved they still have skin, fur, and even muscle tissue. Some people have even claimed to have eaten tiny bits of this preserved meat. However, meat that has been frozen for thousands of years, even in permafrost, is not exactly prime steak material. It's usually very degraded. There's also talk of de-extinction, trying to bring mammoths back using genetic technology. But even if that were possible, it would be a long way off, and it wouldn't be quite the same as tasting the meat of a wild woolly mammoth hunted by our ancient ancestors. That specific culinary experience is truly lost to time. Number 9. The passenger pigeon pie we can only dream of. Imagine a bird so numerous that when a flock flew overhead, it would darken the sky for hours, even days. We're not talking about a few hundred birds, or even a few thousand. We're talking about billions. Billions with a B. This was the passenger pigeon, a bird that once lived in North America. They were incredibly social birds, nesting, roosting, and migrating in colossal flocks. Early European settlers describe scenes that are almost unbelievable today. Tree branches breaking under the weight of so many roosting birds, the sound of their wings like a hurricane. These birds were about the size of a mourning dove, but a bit larger and more streamlined with long tails. They were an important food source for Native Americans for centuries. When European settlers arrived, they too began to hunt passenger pigeons. The birds were so plentiful that they were considered very cheap food, sometimes even food for pigs or servants. People would shoot them, trap them with nets, even knot them out of trees with long poles at their roosting sites. Passenger pigeon pie became a common dish. Cookbooks from the 18th and 19th centuries often included recipes for it. What did it taste like? Descriptions vary, but many said the meat was dark, rich, and quite tasty, perhaps similar to squab, young pigeon, or wild dove, but with its own unique flavor. It was a staple protein for many people. So why isn't passenger pigeon pie on the menu anymore? It's a tragic story of how quickly a species can disappear. The sheer number of passenger pigeons made people think they were inexhaustible. Relentless hunting on a massive scale, especially at their nesting colonies where they were most vulnerable, combined with the destruction of their forest habitat, led to a catastrophic decline. The development of the telegraph and railways in the 19th century even helped hunters, as news of nesting sites could be quickly spread and birds could be shipped to city markets in huge quantities. The decline was shockingly fast. In the 1870s, there were still millions, but by the 1890s, they were rare. The last known wild passenger pigeon was shot in Ohio in 1900. The very last passenger pigeon in the world, a female named Martha, died in captivity at the Cincinnati Zoo on September 1st, 1914. With her death, the species became extinct. So that common dish, that taste once familiar to millions, vanished completely. We have recipes, we have descriptions, but we can never again taste authentic passenger pigeon pie. It's a sobering reminder of how even the most abundant creatures can be lost forever. Number 8. The wild taste of an aurochs roast. Think about the cows we see in fields today, calmly chewing cud. They all have a wild ancestor, a truly formidable beast called the aurochs. Aurochs were massive wild cattle that once roamed across vast swaths of Europe, Asia, and North Africa. They were much larger than most modern domestic cattle. Bulls could stand up to 1.8 meters, almost 6 feet, tall at the shoulder, with long, impressive forward-curving horns. They were powerful and known for their aggressive temperament. Cave paintings from thousands of years ago depict aurochs, showing how important they were to early humans, both as a source of food and as a symbol of power and wildness. For ancient hunters, bringing down an aurochs would have been a significant achievement, providing a huge amount of meat. What would an aurochs roast have tasted like? We can only make educated guesses. It was likely a lean dark meat, probably with a stronger, gamier flavor than the beef we get from domesticated cattle, which have been selectively bred for centuries for traits like tenderness and fat content. The muscles of a wild aurochs, constantly moving and surviving in tough environments, would have been well developed. It would have been a truly wild taste, a connection to a more untamed world. Ancient Romans, for instance, sometimes captured aurochs and displayed them in arenas, and they were also hunted for sport and food. So why can't we experience this primeval flavor? The aurochs, as a wild species, is extinct. As human populations grew and agriculture spread, the forests and grasslands that were the aurochs' habitat shrank. They were also hunted extensively. Their numbers dwindled over centuries. The last known wild aurochs, a female, died in the Jaktaro forest in Poland in the year 1627. With her death, the true wild aurochs was gone forever. You might hear about aurochs today, or see pictures of cattle that look very much like them. These are usually the result of breeding back projects like heck cattle. These projects try to recreate the appearance and some characteristics of aurochs by selectively breeding certain rustic breeds of domestic cattle that are believed to retain some aurochs-like traits. While these modern animals can look impressively similar to the ancient beasts, they are not genetically identical to the original wild aurochs. They are a fascinating experiment, but tasting meat from one of these recreated animals wouldn't be quite the same as eating a roast from a true wild aurochs that lived thousands or even hundreds of years ago. That specific wild flavor is a taste of the past we can no longer capture. Number 7. The true lost flavor of ancient Roman garum. Imagine sitting down to a meal in ancient Rome. Almost every dish, from simple vegetables to fancy fish and meat, would likely have been seasoned with a very special sauce called garum. Garum was the ketchup or soy sauce of its day, a savory, salty, umami-rich condiment that was incredibly popular throughout the Roman Empire for centuries. It wasn't just one thing. There were many types and qualities of garum, some made from specific fish, some mixed with wine, herbs, or spices. The best stuff, called garum sociorum, made from mackerel in Spain, was extremely expensive, like a luxury good. How was it made? Garum was a fermented fish sauce. The basic process involved layering whole small fish, or fish guts and blood, especially from larger fish like tuna, with salt in large vats or clay pots. These pots were then left out in the sun for several weeks or months. The salt drew out moisture from the fish, and natural enzymes from the fish intestines along with bacteria broke down the fish tissues through a process of fermentation and autolysis. Eventually, this process produced a clear, amber-colored liquid, the garum. The solids left behind were called aurochs, a sort of fish paste that was also used as a cheaper condiment. So, if it's just fermented fish sauce, why can't we make it today? We do make fish sauces in many parts of the world, especially in Southeast Asia, like Vietnamese plaek mam or Thai nam play. And some people are even trying to recreate Roman-style garum based on ancient recipes and archaeological evidence. However, there are a few reasons why we probably can't make the exact same garum that a Roman emperor or gladiator might have tasted. Firstly, the specific types of fish used in certain regions for high-quality ancient garum might not be as abundant today, or local fish populations might have changed due to historical fishing pressures or environmental shifts. Secondly, the precise microbial environment of ancient garum production is lost. The fermentation was driven by wild bacteria and yeasts present on the fish, in the salt, in the air, and crucially, in the porous clay of the earthenware fermentation vessels that were used year after year. These unique local microbial communities, or microbiomes, would have contributed distinct flavor notes to the garum from different production sites, like a kind of terroir for fish sauce. We can't perfectly replicate the ancient clay pots and the specific generations of microbes that lived in them. Furthermore, the scale of production and the aging processes in large established factories in places like Pompeii or southern Spain, which often operated for centuries, are also factors that are hard to reproduce. So while we can make delicious fish sauces inspired by ancient Rome, the subtle specific flavors of a garum made in a particular Pompeian workshop 2,000 years ago are likely lost to time. Number 6. The Pharaoh's Brew. Ancient Egyptian beer from the tombs. Think about the ancient Egyptians, the builders of the pyramids, the worshippers of Ra. What did they drink? Water, of course, but also a huge amount of beer. Beer, or henkate as they called it, was a staple of the ancient Egyptian diet for everyone, from pharaohs to farmers to the laborers who built the great monuments. It wasn't just a drink for fun. It was a source of nutrition, calories, and was even used as payment for workers. There were many different types of beer, some light, some dark, some sweet, some spiced with dates, honey, or herbs. How did they make this ancient brew? Was quite different from modern beer making. They often used a special kind of bread, sometimes called beer bread, or iron bread, made from emmer wheat or barley. This bread was lightly baked so it was cooked on the outside but still moist and enzyme-rich on the inside. This bread was then crumbled into water in large clay vats and left to ferment. Sometimes malted grains were also used. The fermentation was spontaneous, meaning it relied on wild yeasts and bacteria present in the air, on the grains, and in the brewing vessels themselves. These wild microbes were unique to the Egyptian environment, perhaps even to specific breweries. The resulting beer was often thick, a bit like a thin porridge or gruel, and probably not very alcoholic by modern standards, maybe around 2 to 5%. It was also usually unfiltered, so it would have contained bits of grain and yeast. So why can't we just follow these steps and brew up a batch of authentic ancient Egyptian beer today? While researchers and craft brewers have made some fascinating attempts to recreate Egyptian beer based on archaeological finds, like beer residues in ancient jars, and tomb depictions of brewing, getting it exactly right is incredibly tricky. One major reason is the ingredients. While we have emmer wheat, the specific ancient Egyptian strains might have had different characteristics. More importantly, those wild yeast and bacterial cultures that drove the fermentation are lost. The unique mix of microbes in the desert air of Giza 5,000 years ago, or those that had colonized a particular pharaoh's royal brewery, simply don't exist in the same way today. Each brewery back then would have had its own house culture of microbes, contributing to the unique flavor of its beer, a bit like sourdough starters. Modern brewing uses carefully selected and controlled yeast strains. Ancient Egyptian brewing was a wilder, more natural process. We can analyze residues and make educated guesses about the flavors. Perhaps it was a bit sour, a bit fruity with a breedy character. But without those original living microbial cultures and a full understanding of all the nuances of their ancient techniques, many of which were passed down orally and never fully written down, the exact taste of the beer that quenched the thirst of a pyramid builder or was offered to the gods in a temple remains elusive. We can make something similar, an interpretation, but not the identical brew. Number 5. The mysterious wine of the ancient Etruscans. Long before Rome rose to dominate Italy, there was another sophisticated civilization flourishing in the region we now call Tuscany. These were the Etruscans. They were skilled metalworkers, sailors, artists, and, very importantly, winemakers. The Etruscans had a vibrant wine culture from around the 8th century BC until they were gradually absorbed by the Romans. Their wine was famous in the ancient Mediterranean and was traded far and wide, reaching places like southern France and even further afield. What was so special about Etruscan wine? They cultivated native grape varieties and developed their own winemaking techniques. Archaeological discoveries have shown us that they often fermented their wine in large terracotta pots called dolia. These dolia were sometimes partially or fully buried in the ground, which would have helped to keep the temperature stable during fermentation and aging. A practice still seen in some traditional winemaking regions today, like Georgia with its Cuvier. The Etruscans seem to have made both red and white wines, and perhaps even wines flavored with herbs or resins, a common practice in the ancient world. So, why is it that we can't pour ourselves a glass of true, authentic Etruscan wine? The main challenge lies in the specific ingredients and the environment of their winemaking. Firstly, while Italy has many ancient, indigenous grape varieties, it's very difficult to know for sure which exact varieties the Etruscans were cultivating over 2,500 years ago. Some of their specific grapevines may have gone extinct, or their genetic makeup may have significantly changed over the millennia through natural mutations or interbreeding with other varieties. We might find grape seeds in archaeological sites, but reconstructing the exact characteristics of the wine they produced is tough. Even more elusive is the unique microbial world, the wild yeasts and bacteria that would have been present on those ancient grapes in the Etruscan soil and living within the porous clay of their specific dolia. Just like with ancient Egyptian beer, these local microbes would have played a huge role in the fermentation process, contributing unique flavors and aromas to the wine that simply cannot be replicate with modern commercial yeasts, or even wild yeasts from a different location or different type of vessel. The specific type of clay used for the dolia, how they were made, and how they were seasoned over years of use would also have influenced the final wine. So, while some modern winemakers in Tuscany and elsewhere are experimenting with Etruscan-style wines, perhaps using ancient grape varieties and terracotta fermentation, the precise taste of a wine enjoyed at an Etruscan banquet is a secret that time has kept. We can evoke its spirit, but not its exact ancient essence. Number 4. Kykeon, the secret drink of ancient Greek mysteries. Imagine being an ancient Greek chosen to participate in one of the most sacred and secret religious rituals of the time, the Eleusinian Mysteries. These were initiation ceremonies held annually for the cult of Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, and her daughter Persephone. For nearly 2,000 years, people from all over the Greek world, from commoners to emperors, flocked to Eleusis near Athens to take part. Culmination of these secret rites, initiates drank a special brew called kykeon. What exactly was in kykeon? That's the big mystery. The details of the Eleusinian mysteries were so secret that initiates were forbidden from ever revealing what they saw, did, or consumed, on pain of death. So, no precise recipe for kykeon was ever written down and made public. We have some clues from ancient texts, though. The Homeric hymn to Demeter, one of our earliest sources, mentions that Demeter herself refused wine but accepted a kykeon made of barley water and glelchen, which is usually translated as pennyroyal, a type of mint. Other ancient writers mention barley meal or groats and water as core components. It seems to have been a kind of potion or gruel, rather than a clear liquid. The truly intriguing part, and why kykeon is on this list, is the speculation that it might have had psychoactive properties, inducing visions or profound spiritual experiences for the initiates. This is a major part of why the mysteries were considered so taboo. If it did have such properties, what was the secret ingredient that caused them? This is where the debate rages. One prominent theory, proposed by scholars like Albert Hofmann, who discovered LSD, Carl Ruck, and R. Gordon Wasson, suggests that the barley used in kykeon might have been infected with ergot, a fungus that grows on rye and other grains. Certain alkaloids in ergot are psychoactive and related to LSD. If the ancient priests knew how to prepare ergot-infected barley in a way that maximized its visionary properties while minimizing its toxic effects, ergot can be very dangerous. This could explain the reported experiences. Other theories suggest different psychoactive plants or mushrooms might have been involved, or perhaps it was a combination of ingredients and psychological factors like fasting, ritual, and intense expectation. The problem is, without a confirmed recipe or clear archaeological evidence of the specific active ingredient and its preparation method, we simply cannot recreate the true kykeon that was drunk at Eleusis. Pennyroyal itself, in very large doses, can be toxic. But it's not known for causing profound visions in the way described. If it was ergot, the specific strain, dosage, and preparation method would have been critical and are now lost knowledge. So, this sacred, potentially mind-altering drink of the ancient Greeks remains an enigma. Its true nature and effects, something we can only speculate about, not experience. Number 3, the lost saffron, elixirs of the Minoans. Journey back in time even further than ancient Greece or Rome to the Bronze Age civilization of the Minoans on the island of Crete. Flourishing from around 2700 to 1450 BCE, the Minoans were a remarkable people known for their beautiful palaces like Knossos, their vibrant art, and their seafaring prowess. Among their rich artistic legacy are stunning frescoes, wall paintings that give us glimpses into their lives. And one plant features quite prominently and beautifully in these frescoes: saffron. Saffron comes from the dried stigmas, the little red threads, of the Crocus sativus flower. It's famous for its golden color, its unique aroma, and its intense flavor. And even today, it's the world's most expensive spice by weight because it's so labor-intensive to harvest. Minoan frescoes show people, often women, carefully gathering saffron crocus flowers in fields. Other frescoes depict saffron being offered to a seated goddess, or used in what appear to be rituals or ceremonies. It's clear that saffron was highly valued by the Minoans, not just as a pretty flower, but for its actual use. So, what were they doing with all this saffron? This is where things get a bit hazy, and why a specific Minoan saffron elixir is something we can no longer precisely make. While they undoubtedly used it to dye textiles a beautiful yellow and perhaps as a spice in food, the prominent role of saffron in ceremonial scenes suggests it might have had other, more specialized uses. Was it the key ingredient in a special drink, an elixir, a potion, or a medicinal preparation with properties we no longer fully understand or attribute to saffron? Ancient cultures often used plants for a much wider range of purposes, medicinal, spiritual, and culinary, than we do today. Saffron, in later Greek and Roman times, was indeed used for medicinal purposes, believed to have properties ranging from mood-lifting to pain relief. Some scholars speculate that the Minoans might have used saffron in specific preparations for its pharmacological effects, perhaps even to induce altered states of consciousness in religious rituals, or as a powerful component in healing remedies. The problem is the Minoans didn't leave us detailed written recipes for these specific saffron-based concoctions. Their script, Linear A, has not yet been fully deciphered. So we don't know the exact ingredients they combined with saffron, the precise quantities, the methods of preparation, or the intended effects of these special elixirs. Furthermore, while we have saffron today, it's possible that ancient Minoan cultivars of Crocus sativus might have had slightly different chemical compositions or potencies compared to modern varieties. Plant genetics can shift over millennia. Without the exact recipes, the full cultural context of its use, and potentially different ancient saffron varieties, any attempt to recreate a specific Minoan saffron elixir would be pure guesswork. We can see its importance in their art. We can smell and taste modern saffron, but the unique elixirs they crafted remain lost to the mists of the Bronze Age. Number 2. Soma and Haoma, the divine drinks of mystery. Imagine an ancient ritual in India. Thousands of years ago, priests are chanting hymns from a sacred text called the Rigveda. They are preparing a special drink, Soma, which they believe is a god itself, a divine nectar that grants immortality, visions, strength, and poetic inspiration. Across the border in ancient Persia, modern-day Iran, Zoroastrian priests perform similar rituals with a drink they call Haoma, praised in their sacred texts, the Avesta, for its life-giving and wisdom-enhancing properties. Soma and Haoma were central to the religious life of these ancient Indo-Iranian cultures. They were pressed, mixed with milk or water, filtered and consumed by priests and worshippers during important ceremonies. The texts describe their effects in glowing terms. They made drinkers feel ecstatic, powerful, and closer to the divine. So, what was this miraculous plant that produced Soma and Haoma? That is one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in the study of ancient religions. Despite countless mentions in the Rigveda and Avesta, which describe the plant's appearance, mountain-dwelling, tawny-colored stalks, how it was prepared and its powerful effects, its actual botanical identity, has been completely lost for over 2,000 years. Scholars have proposed dozens of theories, but none has gained universal acceptance. Some of the candidates suggested include various species of ephedra, a stimulant plant containing ephedrine, Syrian rue, Pigeon harmala, which contains parmala alkaloids that are psychoactive, cannabis, wild rhubarb, chicory, or even a psychoactive mushroom like Amanita muscaria, the fly egret. Each theory has its supporters and detractors, based on interpretations of the ancient texts, linguistic analysis, and archaeological possibilities. The problem is the descriptions in the texts are often poetic and metaphorical, making precise botanical identification very difficult. For example, Soma is described as having no leaves, no seeds, no roots, which has led some to think it wasn't a typical plant at all. Why did the identity of such an important plant become lost? It's thought that as these ancient cultures migrated and their religious practices evolved, the original plant may have become unavailable in new regions, or its use may have been gradually replaced by substitutes, or the knowledge of its identity became restricted to a smaller and smaller group of priests, until it eventually died out. The rituals continued, but often with symbolic, non-psychoactive plant substitutes. Because we don't know for sure what the original Somahaoma plant was, we simply cannot recreate this legendary drink. We can read the hymns that praise it, we can study the rituals that surrounded it, but we cannot experience its reported divine effects. Was it truly a potent amphigon that shaped the spiritual consciousness of two major ancient cultures? Or were its effects exaggerated in poetic hymns? Without the key ingredient, the legendary Soma and Hahoma remained tantalizingly out of reach, a divine elixir whose secret vanished long ago. Number 1. Silphium, the Roman wonder plant that disappeared forever. Imagine a plant so valuable that the ancient Romans stored it in their state treasury alongside gold and silver. A plant so sought after for its flavor and its medicinal properties that it made the city that controlled its trade, Cyrene in ancient Libya, one of the wealthiest in Africa. This wonder plant was called Silphium. For centuries, from around the 7th century BC to the 1st century CE, Silphium was one of the most prized and famous products of the ancient Mediterranean world. What was Silphium, and why was it so special? It was a wild plant, a type of giant fennel that grew only in a narrow coastal region of Cyrenaica, eastern Libya. Every part of the plant was used. The stalks were eaten as a vegetable, the roots were consumed fresh or preserved, and the leaves were fed to livestock, supposedly making their meat more tender and delicious. The most valuable part was its resin or sap, called laser or laser pycium. This resin was used as a powerful and distinctive seasoning in Greek and Roman cooking, adding a unique, pungent, and savory flavor to all sorts of dishes. Think of it as an ancient super spice. The Roman gourmet Apicius, in his cookbook, includes silphium, or laser, in many recipes. Beyond its culinary uses, silphium was renowned as a potent medicine. Ancient physicians, like Hippocrates and Pliny the Elder, wrote about its wide range of therapeutic properties. It was considered a cure-all for everything from coughs, sore throats, fevers, and indigestion to epilepsy, snake bites, and warts. Most famously, and perhaps most significantly for its high demand, silphium was widely believed to be an effective contraceptive and abortifacient. This property would have made it incredibly valuable in a world with few other reliable methods of family planning. The image of the silphium plant, possibly its distinctive heart-shaped seeds or fruit, was even stamped on the coins of Cyrene, symbolizing its economic importance. So, where can we find this amazing plant today? Nowhere. Silphium is extinct. It completely vanished from the earth. The ancient writers themselves chronicled its decline. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century CE, stated that in his time only a single stalk of silphium had been found and sent to the Emperor Nero as a curiosity. He attributed its disappearance to overgrazing by sheep, whose shepherds let them graze on it because it made their meat valuable, and possibly to overharvesting by humans who couldn't get enough of it. Also likely that climate change and desertification in its limited habitat played a role. The Cyrenaeans apparently tried to cultivate silphium, but it seems it could not be successfully farmed outside its very specific wild environment. Because silphium is extinct, we can never truly know its exact taste or precisely replicate its medicinal effects. What did that unique flavor, so beloved by ancient gourmets, actually taste like? Some scholars suggest that asafoetida, another pungent plant resin from the fennel family used in Indian cooking, might be the closest modern equivalent, and indeed asafoetida was sometimes used as a cheaper substitute for silphium in ancient times when silphium became too expensive or rare. But it's not the same. The exact sensory experience of silphium, its complex aroma and taste profile, and its full range of biological activities are lost forever. It remains the ultimate ghost ingredient, a legendary flavor and medicine of the ancient world that we can read about, marvel at its historical importance, but never ever experience for ourselves.